I've already reviewed the sensor and interface of this camera several times in this channel when I covered the A6400 and the A6600 and so on, and I refuse to review those elements again. So instead, we're going to do something a little bit different. Let's get undone. Gerald Undone. He's crazy. What's happening, everybody? I'm Gerald Undone, and today I'm here to speak an excessive amount of camera jargon and chew bubblegum. Unfortunately, it seems I'm all out of bubblegum. Okay, disclosure time. Sony lent me this camera and a couple of lenses to make this review. I don't get to keep it, no money changed hands, and Sony does not get any input on this video's production or get to preview it before it's posted. This video does have a sponsor though, and that's Storyblocks. And also if you hear beeping or grinding sounds outside, that's because the construction that I've been complaining about for a couple months, maybe 6 months now, is still going on, but I think they're almost done because they're laying the sod. So that's gotta be one of the final steps, right? Anyway, this is the ZV-E10. I'll be saying Z a lot because I'm Canadian, but to be honest, I kinda hate the name of this camera. I understand the ZV part because it appears to have similar intentions to the ZV-1, but the hardware is mostly from the A6000 series, so I'm not sure what the E10 is all about, but it just feels like a mouthful and unrelated to anything before. Unless this is the start of a new line of cameras, but it's weird that they would start that new line with an old sensor and interface. Because this is essentially a Sony ZV-1 with an APS-C sensor, an interchangeable lens, a headphone jack, the new digital audio multi-interface shoe, and a bigger battery, but without the built-in ND filter. There, review done. Any questions? I think this video will likely have two audiences. People who watch my channel a lot and already know the story behind the ZV-1 and Sony's previous APS-C cameras, but just want a quick rundown on what's new here. And then new customers potentially shopping for their first real camera. I think it's that second group that Sony's really targeting with this camera, and I'm gonna do a whole vlogging segment in this video for that beginner audience a little later on. But first, let me just talk nerdy to my regular viewers real quick. So this thing has pretty much identical functionality to the ZV-1. The same flip screen, the same beginner novelty buttons for depth of field and product showcase autofocus, face priority exposure, and soft skin effect. The same USB streaming capabilities, the active electronic stabilization, and the built-in 3-capsule mic with included windscreen. Just like the ZV-1, it has a tally light, a zoom lever, and a full range of picture profiles, excluding S-Cinetone, of course, which is on neither of those cameras because this camera is still using the older menu system. The autofocus is very similar as well, except that the ZV-E10 has the updated speed and sensitivity controls that allow up to 7 steps and 5 steps of adjustment respectively for more refined autofocus responsiveness. It still has the same limitations and quirks when it comes to white balance and HDMI output. I recommend you watch my ZV-1 video if you want more detail about that, but basically 4K 30 has no face or eye detection when an HDMI cable is connected, unless you record externally exclusively, and then the screen blacks out when you do this. But just like with the ZV-1, this issue was fixed for 4K 24, just not for 4K 30. It also inherits the quirk from the other APS-C cameras where 4K 30 has a slight crop when compared to 4K 24, but unlike the ZV-1, this new camera does not crop the 4K 24 when compared to the 1080p, so it's easier to get a wider field of view on this camera than it is on the ZV-1, unless you shoot 1080p 120, which does have an added crop. It still has the same stabilization modes where standard is optical stabilization, if your lens supports it, and then active adds electronic stabilization, which also adds a substantial crop. But because this is an interchangeable lens camera, you can put on a wider lens like the 10-18, which has optical stabilization, but with that lens, even if you turn on active mode and shoot in 4K, you'll still have a respectable width for vlogging. This is the biggest advantage I would say this camera has over the ZV-1. However, because it's one of Sony's APS-C cameras, it also inherits that sensor's weaknesses. This is not a new sensor. This is the same sensor Sony's been using in their 6000 series lineup for years. This means it's really starting to show its age when it comes to image quality. It's fine, but nothing amazing compared to recent releases. It also has that famously bad rolling shutter. Hey, I thought I said I wasn't going to review this sensor again. It's still 24 megapixels and still has an ISO range of 100 to 32,000, which definitely beats the low light performance on the ZV-1, but it's not quite as good as the recent A7C, which is the closest full-frame cousin to this camera. But where the A7C had a lackluster viewfinder, the ZV-E10 removed the viewfinder completely. And that viewfinder is really the only major factor that prevents this camera from rendering every other A6000 series camera obsolete, but more on that later. It's using the same FW50 battery that you'll find on the A6400 or A6100, but it's getting slightly better performance out of it, maybe 5 to 10% better, with an average record time of about 80 to 90 minutes. The only cameras that beat this one are the ones that use the FZ100 battery like the A6600 or the full-frame models. There's no record limits and overheating was not a concern, provided you switch the power off temp to high in the menu. Looking around the body, the controls and layout are more similar to the ZV-1 than other A6000 series cameras. Big record button on top, no control dial, fewer function buttons, and a zoom rocker. It has a major advantage over the ZV-1 though due to its size. The compartment that holds the battery and the single SD card slot is far enough away from the quarter 20 mount on the bottom that tripod plates don't interfere with changing batteries or cards, which was my biggest annoyance on the ZV-1. The grip is okay, it definitely feels like a small, somewhat cramped camera in the hands, but impressively, they managed to make it noticeably smaller than the other cameras in the A6000 lineup while keeping a full suite of ports. USB-C, which works for streaming, data transfer, charging, and extending battery life, micro HDMI, microphone in, and headphone out. And the mic port has its own door, which does well not to interfere too badly visually with the flip-out screen, all while being 60 grams lighter and 15 millimeters thinner than the A6400. Now, despite all those refinements, it's clear what this camera's purpose is. It's for vlogging and beginners. The removal of the viewfinder and the addition of so many automatic features and conveniences, and especially the price, I think clearly show the target market for this camera. Because impressively, this camera only costs $699 for the body and $799 with the 16 to 50 millimeter kit lens. For comparison, that's only $50 more than the ZV-1 for this whole lens kit, and $200 less than the A6400 if you compare bodies only. We'll talk value considerations in a minute. First, let's use this camera as it was intended and take it out for a little vlog test. And I'm going to be using the Sony Bluetooth grip that lets you start and stop recording and zoom right from the handle. All right, let's go. Okay, so right now I'm walking through a wooded area that constantly has the sun sort of jumping through, so it should be a good test for both auto exposure and auto white balance. I have it set on shutter priority with face priority, so the aperture and ISO are allowed to change, but the shutter speed is not. I have zebras turned on and I can see that they're sort of all over the place, so this sensor doesn't have excellent dynamic range in video, but I have the picture profile set to standard, which is obviously worse for dynamic range. It's picture profile off, but we can try with S-Log later on. It's 4K 24p, stabilization is just set to standard, so we're using just the lens stabilization. This is the 16 to 50 OSS lens, which wide open go to 3.5 because we're shooting at 16 mil. Right now it's showing it as f5.6, f6.3 as we move through, and then when we're in a dark area it goes to f3.5 and the ISO jumps up to 200. Base ISO with the standard color is ISO 100. The white balance is also set to auto, so we'll see how it changes when I walk through here. And we're using the built-in microphone on the top, and I have the windscreen on top. And it is a little bit windy, rustling through the leaves, and there's some dogs barking off in the distance, and there's different sounds so we can see how well it isolates my voice. I'm using eye autofocus, and I have the default speed and sensitivity value set, and soft skin right now is off, but we can turn that on for a quick test. Let's do that now. There, so I was able to turn on soft skin without stopping recording, and I have it set to the medium setting, so see what that does. One thing I probably complained about already is the rolling shutter. I don't know how much it's going to have an effect on this whole vlogging experience here. Let me just sort of move the camera around. Yeah, it's really jello-y in the display, I can even see. And then the stabilization, I mean, you can make your own opinion on it. I'll go ahead and put it on active stabilization now so we can see how that looks, but we're going to crop in a bit. I'm holding the camera at a somewhat uncomfortable distance, and I have really long arms. I can hold it all the way out here, but you wouldn't be able to do that for very long. That hurts. So I have with just a little bit of a bend in the elbow here. This is at standard. Let's drop into active stabilization now. You cannot switch to active stabilization while recording. You have to stop recording. And you can see this is now my arm fully extended in a painful way. And this is way too tight. But I'll try to do this and I'll hold it out, and you can tell me if the stabilization seems any better. And while we're doing that, I will walk into this open field area so we can see how the exposure and white balance adjusts for me. It should get noisier out here too. All right, here we go. So I am now in direct sunlight. So we're at f9, ISO 100. That's not too bad. This is very uncomfortable on the arm though. And then I'll walk back into the sort of wooded area. You can take a look at the white balance and see how the stabilization is. So this will be dual. This is the lens and the body working together right now. All right, let's change a couple things. Let's switch it to S-Log and then back to standard stabilization and see how the dynamic range works for that. Okay, so now we're back to standard stabilization just so we have a better field of view. I'm still using the 16 mil, and this is S-Log 3, and the image looks, it's not clipping, so that's good. So it seems that dynamic range might be sufficient for this. Let's put some sky in it. I'm not much of a vlogger. I know I'm staring at the screen instead of you guys because I'm trying to watch everything. We're doing a f6.3 in here at ISO 500 because that's the base ISO for S-Log on this camera. All right, I'm now stepping out into direct sunlight with S-Log 3, and we're now at f20 in order to get this exposure. And there's the sky in the background. So this is auto exposure. It says it's face priority, but it's keeping the sky exposed for, let's put a little sun in it so we can, so there's me in the sun, f22. All right, now let's work with that aperture a little bit better by switching the lens to the 10 to 18 so that we can get active stabilization, and I'll throw an ND filter on top. Okay, now we're rocking 5 stops of ND, which is letting us shoot at f5 out here in the sunlight. I've got active stabilization on because I'm on the 10 to 18, so I'm all the way wide on the 10 mil. Fun fact, you can't use the zoom function on this camera for the 10 to 18. It doesn't have the power zoom like the 16 to 50 does. So the 16 to 50 is definitely a better sort of paired lens with this system if you want it to feel more like the ZV-1. But the 10 to 18 does give you this wider frame. I'm at f4.5 now, sky still exposed for ISO 500, S-Log 3, and I'm using active stabilization. Now let's walk back to the dark area again so we can see, now I get to get this same frame without holding my arm that far away from my body, so that's much better. All right, so now I'm walking through the wooded part here at f4 ISO 500 to get a same exposure because we have the ND on, and that's probably the biggest advantage the ZV-1 has over this camera is the built-in ND. On this one, it's really windy. Let's see how the microphone holds up over top of that tree wrestling noise. But yeah, the ZV-1 has the built-in ND, where this one you're gonna have to add your own ND filter if you wanna be able to open up your lenses, which might be better for a little separation when vlogging. Obviously you could put another microphone on top too, if you wanted to take advantage of that, because it has the digital interface shoe thing. But yeah, so I'm gonna walk through a intermittent bright dark area now so we can check the exposure and white balance while I tell you about today's sponsor, Storyblocks. Have you ever found yourself in a position where you could really use some footage, but shooting yourself would either be budgetarily or logistically unfeasible? Well, Storyblocks has you covered with an impressive collection of stock footage, covering a wide range of subjects with unlimited downloads and 4K video. They're also amply supplied with backgrounds, overlays, and After Effects templates, and the interface is easy to use and navigate, and the clips are royalty-free for both personal and commercial use, so you can use them as much as you want, wherever you want. So if you think you could take advantage of a fantastic library of quality stock footage and effects, check out Storyblocks using the link in the description below. Okay, some thoughts after reviewing that footage. First off, that rolling shutter is undeniably noticeable and terrible. I'm not a huge fan of the soft skin effect, but it definitely did something and seems effective if you need it. The dynamic range in standard is not very impressive, but it does improve when you switch to S-Log. However, when I added a heavy ND and used S-Log, the image became very mushy and soft. This is likely because the camera's shutter priority aimed for a neutral exposure of S-Log, when you definitely want to overexpose 1 to 2 stops to beat the noise floor on a sensor like this. So I'd only use S-Log if I was going full manual. I also think the autofocus was failing a bit during S-Log, which this sensor has had problems with in the past as well. The auto exposure features worked well enough for a vlog in my opinion though. The white balance and exposure were never jarring and the transitions were pretty smooth. I didn't notice a huge improvement switching to active stabilization though, so I'd probably stick with standard, which is good because the crop with active was way too intense when using the 16 to 50mm lens. But unfortunately, that rolling shutter really accentuates any lack of stabilization. The audio was pretty good though for a built-in mic. It did well to compete with other sounds in the environment, and although it was a little thin, I think it did its job well enough for a simple vlog. Clarity was good, and the windscreen did its job well. You could argue that in well-lit situations, the ZV-1 produces a more watchable image because of the better stabilization and rolling shutter performance, and the E10 wouldn't really pull ahead until you factor in low light, but the ZV-1 does have that more limited field of view. So I suppose the main reason for choosing the ZV-E10 would be that it has a higher ceiling for quality. You can use better lenses, get more reach, shallower depth of field, etc. And compared to the other A6000 series cameras, if you don't need a viewfinder, this is a no-brainer. It's cheaper for the same quality, or better. The only one that beats it is the A6600 with more function buttons and a bigger battery, but it's hundreds of dollars more, and that added value of the bigger battery doesn't make as much sense as it did when these newer options didn't exist. Compared to the ZV-1, it's an interesting dilemma. If you only plan to use the camera in well-lit scenarios with everything on auto or standard, you're probably better off sticking with the ZV-1. But if you want an upgrade path or a bit more versatility and don't have the budget for full frame, The ZV-E10 is probably the best bang for the buck option that Sony currently offers, as long as you don't need a viewfinder. I just wish it didn't suffer from that terrible rolling shutter. But that's going to be it for me. I hope you found this video entertaining, or at least helpful. And if you did, make sure to leave the old thumbs up and consider subscribing if you haven't already. But if you did not find this video helpful or entertaining, try setting the playback speed to 75%. All right, I'm done.